Hey guys, I know today's October 1st, and October is usually when I do Horror Month, which is where I review all the films in different horror franchises, but I decided to postpone the beginning of Horror Month for a few more days, just because there are a few videos that I want to get out of the way before I really get into Horror Month of this year, so don't worry, Horror Month is not cancelled, it's just postponed for a little bit, and it might end up extending into November. But I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Alpha and Omega, Volume 6 of the Locke Key series. Now, Locke Key is a horror/dark fantasy comic book series written by Joe Hill and illustrated by Gabriel Rodriguez and published by IDW Publishing, and the series was published between the years 2008 and 2013. Now, these comics were also the basis for the recent Netflix series of the same name. Now, I've already reviewed the first 5 volumes of this series, and I'll leave links in the description below to where you can check out those reviews. Now, the writer of these comics, Joe Hill, is also the author of books like Heart-Shaped Box, Horns, Nosferatu, The Fireman, 20th Century Ghost, and he's also the son of Stephen King. Now, Joe Hill, I think, really has proven himself as a writer, and I think these comics especially show that Joe Hill is not just living in his father's shadow. Now, sure, you could see elements of it and Carrie in Locke Key, but to be honest with you, I see more of a Neil Gaiman influence on these comics than I see as Stephen King influence. Now, the premise of Locke Key is it's about this family called the Lockes who moved to this small town in Massachusetts called Lovecraft shortly after the father in the family, Rendell Locke, is murdered, and they move to this place called Key House where Rendell grew up. And the series primarily focuses on the Locke children. You have Tyler and Kinsey Locke, who are both teenagers, and you have Bode, the youngest of the Locke children. But they discover that the house is filled with magic keys that can change reality. The most dangerous of these keys is the Omega Key that can actually open the gateway to what is either hell or just some dimension that's filled with demons. And throughout the series, the Locke children discover that not just their father, but their entire family has a special connection to these keys that goes back generations. But the main villain of this series is a man named Lucas Caravaggio, who also calls himself Dodge, who was once their father's best friend until his mind was corrupted by a demon. And throughout the series, Dodge is trying to get his hands on the Omega Key, which will allow him to bring more demons into our world, demons that he can control. Now, it appeared that Dodge was killed at the end of Volume 4, Keys to the Kingdom, but what actually happened was he used what is known as the Ghost Key to transfer his soul into Bode's body. So, throughout Volume 5, everybody thought Dodge was dead, but he was actually living on in Bode's body, and eventually Bode, who is actually Dodge, gets his hands on the Omega Key. So, in Alpha and Omega, Dodge, who is in the form of Bode, already has his hands on the Omega Key. He also manages to get his hands on the Crown of Shadows, which allows whoever wears it to control all these shadow demons. And at this point, the other members of the Locke family don't realize that Dodge is not yet dead, and this is not Bode. And the real Bode is now a ghost who is haunting Key House and is desperately trying to get people to hear him to warn them about what Dodge is doing. So now it's prom night at Tyler and Kinsey's high school, and all the kids are having an after party in these caves where the black door, the gateway to the demon's dimension, is located. So Dodge, with the help of the shadow demons, traps these kids down there, killing some of them and corrupting others. And Dodge's apocalyptic plans for the future are finally revealed, where it turns out he wants to make more keys to help him recreate reality in his image. So Tyler, who really becomes the true hero of this comic, has to save not just his brother and not just the souls of these kids that Dodge has corrupted, but also save the world as we know it. But Alpha and Omega, I thought, was a great conclusion to this series, and in a lot of ways, I think this is the best of the Locke and Key series, but you absolutely have to read the first 5 volumes in order to understand what's going on in this one. To make sort of an analogy with the Marvel movies, in a lot of ways, this is sort of the endgame of the Locke and Key series, because this is where everything that the series has been setting up comes to an epic and even devastating conclusion. And Alpha and Omega, I think, is the most action-packed of all the Locke and Key graphic novels, but in a lot of ways it's also the most emotional and the most moving out of all of them. Like, there's some really heartbreaking moments in this comic, and there's some really devastating moments, like characters that we have come to know and like throughout this series end up dying in this volume. And the ending, like the last chapter in here, is really freaking heartbreaking, and, as I said, just emotionally moving. This volume also feels in a lot of ways sort of like the thesis of what the entire Locke and Key series is about, because at its heart, Locke and Key is really a coming-of-age story about growing up, but also about dealing with the loss of a loved one, because really this whole series is about the Locke children, but particularly Tyler, letting go of their father. My only criticism of this is at the end, a major character ends up dying, and it's really freaking heartbreaking, but at the very end, there's sort of a Deus Ex Machina, or sort of a MacGuffin that sort of reverses this death and brings this person back, and to me that felt like kind of a cheat, because again, one of the main points of this series is this is really a series about dealing with death and letting go of a loved one. Now, of course, this is a series that deals with magic keys that can change reality, so it's not like the ending doesn't make sense in context of the story, but to me it would have felt more mature to leave this character dead. But that's just me, and I understand why Joe Hill decided to bring this character back. But besides that, Alpha and Omega is an excellent addition to what already is an excellent comic book series. It's a series that really does combine the sensibilities of horror, fantasy, comedy, and also real human drama. Now, this was the final volume of sort of the main story arc of the series, but Joe Hill did technically continue the series even after this, but I think the other Locke and Key stories that he did after this are supposed to be set before the main events of the series. And sometime, I think later on this month, there's actually going to be a crossover between Locke and Key and Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, which I'm really excited for, even though I don't know how that's going to make sense continuity-wise, because Sandman is in the DC universe, and there's no implications whatsoever that Locke and Key is in the DC universe. Locke and Key is clearly in its own universe, so I don't know if they're going to try to do the whole multiverse thing to explain how they're connected, or if Joe Hill's basically gonna say, fuck continuity. I know it's gonna have something to do with Lucifer's key to hell, so I think this story is gonna somehow tie that in with the Locke and Key mythos. But yeah, that was my review on Locke and Key Volume 6, Alpha and Omega by Joe Hill, and bye.